Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I am delighted to be here this morning if you're on the West Coast like I am, or somewhere else in the world, maybe in Australia, maybe on the East Coast. But either way, I hope you're ready to enjoy a little Australian wine with me today. It's going to be a lot of fun. I am bringing on Mark Davidson from Wine Australia. He is going to be taking me through a few different wines, and we're going to be talking about really exciting new program that's happened with Wine Australia. Hi, Mark.
Hi there. Can you see me, hear me?
I can see you, and now I'm looking at the new IG Live setup, and it's like they've just like added like a whole bunch of features. It's very exciting.
Cool.
But you look great. Where are you right now?
I'm not outside like you were yesterday when we were chatting. I'm inside, and this is actually my living room, but set up as a sort of a wine studio.
It's like you're on Mars right now, which I enjoy. I feel like you should be drinking on Mars.
Exactly.
Can you hear me okay?
I just landed. Yeah, I just landed.
Well, I'm so excited to talk with you. It's been a little while since you and I've had a chance to share a glass together. I think probably the last time was up in Lake Tahoe for Australia Decanted. But for those who haven't had the opportunity to share a glass with Mark, can you just give us a little intro of who you are and what you do and why you're here?
So I work currently for Wine Australia. It's my job as the head of education for North America for Wine Australia. I come from a long SOM background and hospitality background. I was born in the UK, moved to Australia, where I did my hospitality training when I was a young man, long time ago. Then I went back and lived and worked in Europe for a bit, met a Canadian, moved to Canada, lived in Toronto, lived in Vancouver, lived in San Francisco. And as you do when you've lived in such famous places, when you really make it in the world, you move to Des Moines, Iowa, which is where I'm currently located.
Of course.
Well, it's where it's all at. Where it's all at.
Definitely what I think of when I think of like a great wine city. Although I've never been, so I shouldn't judge. Well, it's been a crazy year for everyone since I've last seen you, especially with regard to the wine industry. But Wine Australia has been doing some pretty cool things as of late, and I'd love to jump in before we taste this flight of cabs that I'm so excited to jump into. In fact, I've already like stained my teeth with them a bit. But since I saw you in Tahoe, you guys have launched a new platform called Australian Wine Connect, and it is, I have to tell you, no hyperbole, it is badass. It is everything, and I'm sure you can relate, having been in the trade. It is everything that you want as a sommelier, as a wine buyer, as anyone who is craving information, just looking for all the nitty-gritty facts, sort of like condensed into one place. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, what the program is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everybody in the industry had to. I mean, I hate the word pivot because it seems like it's used in every second sentence for everyone nowadays. Yeah. But the reality is that everyone's got to do things differently. There are no big wine fairs like ProVine that we're not involved in. And so how is this, and how are we able to connect? Hence, obviously,
right.
the word. But the reality is this is a brilliant platform. We've got a couple of cool things. I mean, our education platform, Australian Wine Discovered, still exists, but this is a place, there's a marketplace area where there's 250 wineries with just over 2,000 actual products listed there. So it's a place for people, for buyers to genuinely be able to connect, look at what's available in their respective markets across the globe, which is very, very cool. And also potentially log into some the expert section is kind of the market. The discover section is the education piece, and then there's conversations. You can have direct conversations essentially with the winemakers, and it's pretty. I think we're always a little bit on the front foot with some of this stuff, and this is a pretty exciting platform. And like you say, everything you want and could imagine as a sort of a virtual marketplace, if you like, it exists there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. When Deirdre who works with you, was describing it to me, I was a little bit. It was a nebulous concept, and then I saw it and I was like, oh, this is like always what we're looking for when you're back in the cellar, like deep, like looking for all the information on what wines to buy, and like, who should I be excited about as a producer? Like this is the thing. So yeah, for anyone in the trade that's watching, and this is a platform that is geared for the trade. So if you are a wine buyer, a writer, sommelier, this is your jam all day long. You're going to be super stoked about this. And one of the really cool things that you guys are doing are some of these like interactive webinars and tastings, which is really, you know, sort of the focus of what we're doing today, giving people a little preview of something coming.
Yeah, I'm really excited about. I'm excited about lots of things about Australian wine, but I'm excited about the PullOff, which we're doing it next week. And I actually just posted something on Vintage Mark Davison on my Instagram, and also on Facebook is a link to the actual invitation for people who want to tune in. But next Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time, we're doing a global comparison for Chardonnay, and we are genuinely making it global in the sense that it's we've got 3 panelists: John Zabo from Canada, Mary Gorman McAdam from New York, and Oz Clark from London. So that's going out. There's a few select people who've got some wines. We can't get, it's just a reality check. We can't get wines out to everyone, but people can tune in and see the seminar. And we're having a discussion. And the genesis of this idea was to sort of follow on from the really cool things that we've done that you've experienced, that Chardonnay tasting up at Decanted in Tahoe.
So good.
We've historically done these comparisons, and I just think this whole idea of constantly looking at our wines in isolation is great, because there's lots of things to see and explore, but it's really nice to sort of put them in the context of other classic examples. And we've done that historically, and that's what this is. However, a slightly more ambitious and slightly more challenging way of doing it, because we can't be in person. And you remember the conversation at the end of the reveal in Tahoe with the Chardonnay. We're not going to be able to do that as much, but it's pretty cool. There's global examples that can be done blind, and then there's 7 absolute cracking wines from exactly some of the areas we're talking about today with Cabernet. So yeah, it's nice. It's not a competition. We never try and make this a competition.
No.
Except we want to win if there was one, but that's not what we're trying to do. It's really about, it's not about it's about relevance, you know?
You know, I have to say at Decanted, when we did that Chardonnay global comparison, you remember what happened. I mean, you threw some ringers in there. And we all thought for sure when the Toll Puddle came out, we didn't know it was Toll Puddle. We were like, this is Burgundy. I don't think there was a hand in the room that wasn't raised that said, this is Australian wine. And to that end, I think it was an amazing way to see Australian wine, you know, put up against some of the benchmarks of these other regions, and just totally shine, you know. And not only did we think it was Burgundy, which I think, you know, to some degree, maybe perpetuates the myth that, like, you know, there is a, you know, certain style, but I think, you know, seeing that wine alongside, you know, the greats of the world, it just like, it solidified Australia's place as just such an amazing contender when it comes to quality wines. So it was exciting. And as soon as that ended, I went online and I bought a whole bunch of Toll Puddle, because I was like, this is insane. This is so good. But, you know, in that same vein, we're going to be tasting 3 wines today, because I think one of my big takeaways from Australia Decanted, probably in the same way that, you know, big takeaway for me living here in Napa Valley, was the diversity that exists within Australia, within just Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, just, you know, not even how many grapes are grown there, but just this one single varietal, that we sort of have this notion of being, you know, a little bit, you know, monolithic, right? Like, we all think of Australia, we think of Napa Cabernet as one thing, we think of Australian Cabernet, Australian Shiraz as one thing, and going there and tasting through all of these incredible examples really just shed so much light for me on, you know, what Australia is capable of, given the different terroirs and places. So we've got 3 wines to taste today. I'm hoping that we can use your expertise to take me through them, because you know, as much as I learned Australia Decanted, I am not the expert here. So 3 wines. We've got the Penley Estate 2018 Tolmer from Coonawarra. I'll throw out this beautiful label that went with my dress today. So I think we'll start there. Then we'll head to the Vas Felix, which I loved. It doesn't go with your dress, Mark. I'm sorry. I should have told you to, like, you know, should have been more dress accordingly. This goes with it, though. I feel like the Vas Felix matches you, which is good. And I love Vas Felix. This is actually a producer that I'm pretty well acquainted with. And this is the Filius. This is the 2019 Filius from Margaret River. And then we'll finish up with the Higginbotham, the Truman 2018 from McLaren Vale. So some wines to get through. But I think you had said let's start with Coonawarra, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could do either way. I mean, but I think Coonawarra is a really cool place to start, simply because it's arguably the region in Australia that is most noted for Cabernet. based on history and reputation. I think that all of them sit very strongly now, but that's the place that's had this long history. It dates back to the 1800s. To be brutally honest, it was Shiraz in the beginning. And if you just a quick little snapshot of Cabernet in Australia, it's been in the ground for a long time in Australia, back to the mid 1800s. But a lot of where the original colonies were probably not the best suited to Cabernet. I think we always think of Cabernet, oh, it's a warm climate variety. Actually, it's a mild maritime climate variety. I mean, it shines best. It's not impossible to make great wines in the warmer climates, but heat and drought stress and all those things, that wasn't the best places for it. So we had to find these maritime influenced areas as other, you know, if you think about the classic examples of Cabernet from other parts of the world, most of them are somehow maritime influence, and Coonawarra was like that. The cool thing about Coonawarra is this: it's probably, of all the soil types in any major wine region in Australia, it's the most homogeneous, and I mean that in the most positive way. Is that classic terra rossa soil, limestone underneath this iron oxide based red soil, and there's a water table down deep below. The vines know that, and they're sneaking down, trying to struggle through that limestone to get to it. So that's part of the beauty of it. And Cabernet just shines there, and there's a really interesting phenomena in the region in that when you're there, you don't think it's maritime because you don't seem to be close to the ocean, but there's a really interesting upwelling of a cold current right towards the end part of the harvest. They call it the upwelling of the Bonnie current. Sits off the coast of the limestone coast, and you can feel it in the vineyards. Extends the growing season, cools down the overall temperature, especially at night, and that's what makes it so ideal for Cabernet Sauvignon. And and Henley, a very, very, very classic estate.
It's
I grab the right glass here.
yeah, please. No, I'm glad we started here because it's giving me all of the savory stuff that I think I remember from Coonawarra. We certainly know Cabernet to have an herbaceous tendency depending on where it's grown, but you know, we associate some of those herbal eucalyptus notes with Australia in general, but I find them to be a little bit more on the savory side than the sweet side in this wine. So it definitely has more of, you know, we think of sweet sage and then maybe something more, you know, on the savory side, like a rosemary, you know, something that feels a little bit more herbaceous on the savory side. And this definitely has all of that, but it is distinctly Cabernet in a really lifted sort of way. I think I mentioned to you the other day, I did this great taste. Sorry, my phone keeps going dark for some reason. This great tasting with the sea clone, which is, I don't know if that exists in Australia, but it exists here in Napa. And it's famously planted to, Martha's Vineyard has planted the sea clone, as well as several others that we had tasted. And it's interesting because all of those lifted florals, lifted aromatics, all of the things that we were tasting, I'm really getting in this, awesome. But in a way that's very, very Australian. And feels, you know, I think, again, when we think of like Australia as being, you know, we think of a person, like we think of like a human that exists in Australia. It's hot in Australia, right? Like the way that we think of California as being like one hot place, but there is this like really wonderful sort of maritime cool climate thing happening with this wine. You know, it's got a little bit of rusticity to it. You know, it's got a little bit of that like great minerality, that crushed rock that we love in Bordeaux, but there is sort of this like this sun-kissed thing that's happening in the glass as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I love your notes there about it, because I think what's happened over time is that we've forgotten that Cabernet, one of the classic elements of even, you know, properly ripe Cabernet, it's a slightly herbal lift. Old school Bordeaux, old school Napa. I mean, that is part of the charm. And I think we've had that beaten out of us a little bit. It's like, oh no, it's got to be ripe, it's got to be ripe. And I feel like that perfectly ripe Cabernet should have that little herbal lift. And I like the way you describe it, because I always think of bay leaf or sage as really good descriptors, because that's a herbal, but it lends, it's not green and unripe herbal. It's, I know it's weird, but it's got a sort of a savory note to it. And
so as we're waiting for Mark to maybe kick back on, one of the things that I do want to mention is this tasting that's happening. If you're in the trade, it is for you. You can go on the website. I'll link everything in my bio after we're done here to share with you guys where to sign up for that. I think it's going to be absolutely incredible. You heard who's going to be a part of it. But truly, when I was at Australia Decanted, the global comparative tasting that we did with Chardonnay was really, for me, what solidified in my mind that Australia was not this beast of a region that only did this one thing. It really just totally changed my perspective. And I'm excited that this platform, and specifically these webinars, are going to be obviously broadcast to the world so that you guys get a chance to see what's going on as well, because I felt very fortunate, but also a little bit, you know, a little selfish keeping all that stuff to myself. So let's see what's going on. Hopefully Mark can join us again. I'm going to keep drinking. I'll move to the Vas Felix as we're waiting. This is actually a wine that I've gotten to taste a few times, both the Chardonnay and the Cabernet. Of course, we're tasting the Cabernet today. This is a 2019 vintage from Margaret River, and I love Margaret River. I always think of Margaret River as being this place that gives me a lot more of the floralities. So we talked about some of that savory stuff that was happening here with the Penleigh, but the Margaret River Cabernets to me always have, you know, in the way that we love Margaux, and I don't know if there's like, you know, word distinction there for me, but in the way that Margaret River feels very floral, I always, you know, or excuse me, Margaux feels very floral, and we're getting Mark back. I always find that with Margaret River, so maybe he can maybe shed some light on what's going on there. Are you back?
A call came in. Of course, a call comes in, and I did something wrong. So my fault.
You know,
I
meant to tell you before this, because I did it for mine. I turned my do not disturb on, and when that happens, like, just forget about it. It's, you know, it's like your phone acts like it's never gotten a phone call in its life before. It's brand new.
Here's me working beautifully with technology, and I showed what an absolute Luddite I am.
I kept it moving. I moved on to the Vas Felix, if that's okay.
Awesome,
because I love this wine, and I was telling everyone I've had the luxury of having several different bottlings of this wine, and I think Virginia, the winemaker, was at Australia Decanted, right? I remember some of the great talks that she gave.
Yeah, she's fantastic, and it's there's something really special about Margaret. I've got to be careful in my job because I like all regions equally.
Yes, that's right.
Margaret River is a very, very special place, and given that it's effectively quite a new appellation for us in the sense that the first vines were planted in '67. That's relatively young. It's just, you know, they've essentially just celebrated over 50 years of production there. And Vas Felix was the first winery to plant grapes. So that's
right. I remember she said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really cool thing, but it was established on the strength of a viticultural survey by a guy called Dr. John Glaston to say, hey, what's the potential here? And he basically came back with comparisons to Bordeaux in a warmer climate, but maritime influence, gravelly soils. There you go. It's like, why not? And so while there's a lot of cool stuff in Margaret River, when push comes to shove, Cabernet's kind of the deal. But I just think there's a style, and that's effectively an entry level wine for them. That's a $20-something wine. But I just think there's a fragrant floral lift to Margaret River that I think is unbelievable.
Were you listening to me before this?
No,
exactly.
I was panicking before this. I was trying to find out what went along with my technology here. But what did you say?
That's what I was saying. I've always found Margaret River, and I don't know if it's because I always liken it to Margaux and Bordeaux, that I always find this sort of like floral quality in the wines. And I've never known if that was like a word association that led to a confirmation bias, or if that was like a genuine thing. But every time I smell Margaret River Cabernets, there is, you know, with regard to what we just tasted and not being so savory, there is always such a florality to these wines, really lifted aromatics, but in a different way. Roses, violets, lilac. I mean, you name it, it's kind of in there.
Yeah, I think, I love the floral element of it. And I also think there's this gravelly element, not, it's Paris suggested probably, but it's almost like a dusty road that's just been rained on. Which means it's not dusty anymore. But you know what I mean? It's kind of there's that warmth and there's that smell of the earth in there at the same time. It's overlaid with that floral component. And I love the Margaux comparison. As a young sommelier, I remember trying to figure out the discussions between Bordeaux. And I remember finally tasting a bottle of Chateau Palmer that was like, oh, now I know what you're talking about. I constantly get that in Margaret River, and I think it's incredibly charming. And it's also, you taste this wine and it's kind of nice to be reminded that Cabernet can be a medium-bodied experience. You know, it doesn't always have to be.
That's a good point.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm a big fan.
And it's, what's also really interesting is it's salty. There is this great salinity to this wine. So as much as, you know, I think we think of florals as being more associated with, you know, some varieties like, you know, like Syrah or Grenache or Mourvedre, you know, it still is very Cabernet, but it also has something that is not quite those varieties. And there's a salinity, there's fruit, but it is like, it's a salty wine. I'm very into it. This is like somebody had mentioned at the tasting I was at the other day as a salted Asian plum. And I think that's a really good descriptor maybe for this wine as well.
Yeah, that's got to be that. I mean, I don't think the grapes pick up salt necessarily, but I think it is. That's the environment.
No.
it's ocean on three sides effectively. It's just this peninsula that kind of juts out, and yeah, it's a pretty special place. A lot of really cool things happening there, but yeah, and it's all, I like this reminder too. And I think one of the things that I think is very cool about what's going on with Cabernet in Australia is that you can get regionally expressive, really good examples of what that region's doing, Margaret River or Coonawarra, for $20. You can actually get a sense of what's happening there for $20. And I think, wow. So, you know, you got to think about all sorts of things, but one thing you have to think about is your pocketbook, which is kind of nice.
It is, yeah. You know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because I've always found the Vassy Lakes wines to be very fair price, but the Filius is kind of absurdly priced when you think about what you're getting in the bottle.
Yeah, don't tell them that, though.
I mean, no. I mean, we want to keep it that way, but it is.
Absolutely.
You know, I think Australia, as much as we know it as a place for being top quality, it's also incredible value. You know, what you're getting as compared to other regions is remarkable.
Well, it's also, I mean, both those produce, like I know for a fact, if Penley has a wine that's $18 and they have one that's $150, Vas Felix has this at $22 and they have one at $150. But the point is, at the absolute top end, $150, maybe a tad more, a tad less. That's it's kind of as far as you can go. And I mean, I think there's a lot of producers wish they could get $500. There's a lot of envy about what goes on in Napa for sure. But the reality is that for $150, you can get categorically the best stuff being produced in Cabernet-based wines being produced in Australia anywhere. So, which is pretty amazing, I think.
I think it's great. And it's very oftentimes the place that I direct people that are getting into wine that don't know where to start, that don't want to spend a ton of money. They want the quality. They want it to be, you know, varietally correct. They're not trying to look for something that's, you know, off the beaten path. Although for sure you can find some crazy varieties, and I think we'll talk about that later. But I've always loved Australian wine for that reason, and also because I know that some people look at these screw tops and go, is it good quality? But I've always loved that a lot of these wines, whether they're, you know, $100 or $20, the screw top, this is still the enclosure, is one of my favorites, because, you know, you don't get it home and wonder like, oh, did this wine go, is it corked, or is it, what's going on with this?
Yeah.
So one less variable that a consumer's dealing with.
Well, we're both lapsed sommeliers. You don't mind if I call you that at this particular point? No. I like pulling corks out of bottle of wine. I do. There's just a romance to it, but it doesn't have any foundation in reality. You know, our most expensive, not to say corks don't exist in Australia, they absolutely do, but our most expensive wine, which would be Henschke Hill of Grace Shiraz, off, you know, it's under Vino Lock, and that's $750 a bottle. And that's because the producer's like, I can't bear people taking this away and not knowing that it will be in the condition I'd like you to have it in under cork. And so that's the decisions that have been made. So yeah, it's a quality conscious decision by the producers wanting the consumers to get the right stuff, you know. So
I love it. I'm very into it. I love that the consumer is first in line when it comes to Australian wine. So
yeah.
I wanna jump to the Hickenbotham, which is, I won't say a departure, but definitely shows a different side of what we're talking about today. So this is the 2018 Truman from McLaren Vale. So let's talk about McLaren Vale a little bit, because I think when we tasted the McLaren Vales up in Tahoe, I was like, this is where power lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a funny region because it is, on one hand, you've got so much really cool stuff happening with just sustainability, with new varieties being planted, but it's still 60% Shiraz there, and you have to be in the right spot and in the right little pockets for Cabernet. But Cabernet's got a wonderful history in McLaren Vale as well. But it's not, yeah, I mean, I think there's probably more similarities to the intensity and power and fruit in the red wines in McLaren Vale as there is to Barossa, but you are right on the coast. It's sort of a Mediterranean, warmer sort of coastal feel. And I think that has a way of just sort of mitigating or sort of pulling back a bunch of the characteristics. But I like if you think about the benchmark classic regions for Cabernet in Australia, there's no question we've just looked at the two. They're the ones, put them forward and go, okay, this is, you know, for classic power and structure and elegance. But I think there's a whole bunch of slightly warmer regions where Cabernet is being grown that I would argue are pretty great sort of gateway wines for the confirmed Napa lover. If you're a Bordeaux drinker, you probably kind of would lean towards what's going on in Margaret River, but that softer, riper fruit that you're a bit more accustomed to in Napa, which is a gross generalization because, I mean, it is across the board, but the reality is that I think it's a bit softer, a bit riper. have a look at McLaren Vale or even Barossa or Langhorne Creek or some of these other warmer regions. So there's great Cabernet in all those regions as well. So
Yeah, no, this definitely shows its fleshy side, though it's not without great structure and acidity and all the things that we love to support balance. But this is a wine that I will say is made by one of Napa's own, right? So this is the one and only Chris Carpenter.
I haven't said it to his face, but I do have a man crush. I mean, I should join a queue. I'm sure that anyone that's met Chris Carpenter is
long.
like, damn
it's
it,
long.
you a nice guy. And he's just so nice, and he's always got time for you, and yet he's crafting in Napa $500. I was doing a Napa Valley wine study program for some other studies I was doing, and mentioned that he was like an excited schoolboy talking about his project in McLaren Vale. It was like this, oh, this is so cool. And I think what he's done down there, it's been a sort of a cross-cultural kind of like learnings, that he's taking some things he does in Napa and he's learning from what's going on in Australia. And I think it's great. And I'm really impressed with how this wine has been. I think I actually have a slightly different vintage. I got the 17, you have the 18, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but how his hand in this is slowly shaping this. And I do see a little bit of Napa Valley styling in there, but it's the personality of McLaren Vale comes through, and I think that's a kind of the key thing.
Yeah, I think it to your point, it does support sort of the richness of this region can kind of have. Though, I don't want people to think that they're getting Napa Valley in Australia. This still has very McLaren Vale Australian markers. So even though you might have had a Chris Carpenter wine from Napa, I mean, this is such a fun way to experience Australia in a way that might be similarly fashioned, but still has a unique fingerprint. There's a softness, a plushiness to this, but like I said, I mean, that is sort of like a Chris style to strike that balance between soft and plushy, but still has like a nice tannic backbone. And that's sort of what I love about McLaren Vale in general, is you can get all of this intensity with fruit, but then there's these wines that are made there that are just gorgeous and age worthy, and they stand up to food. And this is a really, really special wine.
And I think the other thing too, that sort of struck me as I'm just tasting this, is that, and you could take this even globally, never mind within Australia, is that there's a personality to Cabernet that doesn't go away. It doesn't matter what you try and do, what the vineyard tries to do, what the winemaker does, there's Cabernet right in the heart of everything. And I like that. It's a strong personality, and it's not like you ever pick it up and go 100% Cabernet. Gee, I wonder if this is something else. It's like, it's Cabernet.
It's Cabernet.
And even the first iterations of, say, some of these super Tuscans where it'd be a little bit of Cab in there, you can taste it. 10%. You go, well, there it is. So I love that strong personality, and I think it's awesome.
I love it. Looks like you have a fan here. Wow, hello, Sarah, attended your masterclass last month, and it was fabulous. There you go. You should put that on your website or something, like approved by WineSense. There was a question from Drew. Hopefully it'll come up here, and I think it's a good question. Hopefully you can see it. So I've had the pleasure of tasting some amazing suitcase imports from friends of the best Australian wines I've ever had. Is there an effort to start exporting more of the wines being kept in Australia?
Yeah, I think there are. Yeah, and I think this is the problem. Is I'm presuming Drew is based here in the US. There's a general narrative that the best wines in Australia are kept there. That actually isn't true. I think the issue we have here in the US, lots of really cool stuff comes in here, but you've got a very complicated got to be careful what I say here. The distribution system is awkward here because it's like 50 countries. For example, I've got a young guy that went to Decanted here in Des Moines. I can walk into his store right now and buy Clonakilla, Okota barrels, a bunch of really cool stuff. And I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, which is not the hotbed of.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I can't get Clonakilla out here.
You can now. We need to talk afterwards. They've shifted. Okay. Yeah, we can talk. But the point is that it just depends where you are. But that being said, sometimes suitcase wines, I absolutely agree that there are certain things that don't make it here. But there's some of our iconic wines and some small production wines that are absolutely categorically now back in the US, and it's just a question. I mean, I'm happy to connect if Drew wants my information. We can sort of help him out. But yeah, navigating as to where these wines exist, they're usually somewhere, but it's not that easy. They don't show up on the big sort of shelves. But yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I think part of this pain point has been eliminated with the Australian Wine Connect platform, right? Like there is an opportunity for those in the trade who are curious about where to find these wines, who's importing them, and where they can be found, there is information on that.
It's such a great point. Yeah, that's one benefit. You can kind of go there and ask the questions that you want to ask and sort of source out the producers that you might be looking for. But it's like any country, there are some small producers that they're making 300, 400 cases of wine and selling in the US. It's not that they wouldn't like to, but it's probably just not a priority. That if that's what Drew's talking about, yeah, absolutely. But you can argue that in any country there are. But I'm always thrilled to sort of see when there's these little pockets of wine showing up in the most unlikely places. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I am too. And on that note, there are some very exciting wines in Australia that are not Cabernet, and I would love to just pick your brain for a few moments about some of the more exciting things that are happening in Australia right now with regard to the wine scene.
I think actually on the strength of the last one we tried, I think since 2019 that wine's been organic and biodynamic. And I think that's a really important movement, not just in McLaren Vale, but McLaren Vale is an awesome lens through which to sort of discuss the organic and biodynamic movement. It's a very sort of green region, for want of a better expression. There's I think that's a massive move, and it might not be certified. It might not be even people talking about it. It's just that they're doing it because there's no excuse not to, especially in some of the sort of benign climates like McLaren Vale. You don't need to use the sorts of sprays that you sometimes do in cooler, wetter climates, even if you could argue you don't need to there either. And so I think there's a big movement there. And there's plenty of producers that have been organic or biodynamic for well over 2 or 3 decades. And I think that's exciting. So that's a big move. I think the other thing I think that's really exciting, and I'm in the process of writing the Wines of Australia book for very slow process, I might add, but for the classic wine library. And one of the things I'm trying to capture is the nature of Australians, which is broad, because I think that's now shining through in what's happening with the wines. Because if you look at what we're producing, there's no native varieties in Australia. They've all come from somewhere else, but they look and feel different. And yes, that's environment, and yes, the usual markers of terroir could be the discussion. I think there's a personality in, and I think what that leads me to this discussion, which is more about, I think we had a period of mimicry where I'm making a Rhone style Shiraz and I'm making a Burgundian style Pinot. You don't hear that as much anymore. They're making Yarra and they're making this, and they're making things to suit them. McLaren Vale is a great place to sort of continue discussions, but there's this category we call smashable reds. You would have had some of them, and by smashable, I think what would be the American equivalent?
Like chuggable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, crushable. Yeah,
crushable. So much less cool than smashable. But
it's smashable. It's smash. That's the Aussies. I'd smash a glass of that. It's like, okay, it was a smashable red. But okay, so the point is, it's a really interesting thing, and it's not like you can think there's so many producers that are doing it, but it's more this idea that what's our environment like? How do we want to drink wine every day? If you're drinking wine every day and you want some red, you don't want something that's big and heavy all the time. You want something that's just boom. But it's easy to make simple fruity wines. You just do carbonic maceration, do whatever you want, make it really simple. But there's this beautiful, the better smashable reds to my mind, they're still vinous. They're just a bit lighter in alcohol, usually at 12 and a half, but they've got this wonderful, vinosity to them, but they're like, it's like, white wines masquerading as res. Chuck them in the fridge for 10 minutes and see what happens.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. It's fun. And I like that.
I love it.
Well, think about rosé. We're all fascinated by rosé. How that happened, we don't know. It just happened. That, to my mind, is the next step. You go,
cool.
Rosé's cool. Now, whenever I give that, I always have sort of my sort of canary in the coal mines. Like, well, my friends are like, hey, what do you think of this? And that style, they're like, what's that? Give me more. And why did that bottle disappear so fast? Cool.
Yeah, well, it feels like one of those great wines that we think of, like that our grandparents would have had, like the wine that we had on our dinner table on Sunday nights that just, went with everything. It was easy to drink. It was cold. When it could go in a wine glass, but it could go in a tumbler. Like I think smashable is the perfect word for that.
And think about classic sort of before the image change, and now it's come back again. Think about why Beaujolais was the ultimate bistro wine in France.
Exactly.
Because you never got sick of it. You could just, you could pound it, and it's like, yeah, thank you. Just enough grip and intensity and structure, and it keeps it interesting. But no, I think it's cool, and that's an exciting time, and it suits the way we eat, the way we live in Australia. So yeah,
you guys definitely know how to eat and live. I only got a little taste of that up in Tahoe, but I have plenty of Australian friends who have shown me the way. They are my cultural Yodas in that way. But yeah, from coffee to food to living like on the beach, like you guys know what you're doing. And hello to Robin, Kelly O'Connor, Drew. I agree with you. I would love to see more Riesling. That was actually and I think I've told you this, Mark, Australian Riesling was my first like epiphany moment with Australian wines, because Scott used to bring in some beautiful, oh gosh, what was it, like Tyrrells? That was more like Semillon, but
yeah, probably. We're getting, they are here, and it sort of feeds back into that discussion point. There is still I used to teach WSET when I was up in Vancouver and all sorts of wine classes, and I started those classes out with a bunch of, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed sort of wine people, and say, if you don't like Riesling by the end of this program, you will not only fail this program, but you will not be successful at anything you ever do in the future. Only to just get people to,
wow.
It's a joke, but people would be like, really?
But
no, I'm kidding. But the reality is that Riesling, we keep talking about it, but it's not coming through for the average consumer, because there is still this connotation. But I actually think the great gateway into dry style Rieslings is things like when you've had Vale, I'm guessing.
I was going to say Vale, the contour, or what is it called?
Serious aged one, but even just those
that was gorgeous.
Citrus scented, limey kind of things that are just completely delicious, and they're dry. And I always used to say, if it's at 12% alcohol, maybe 12.5, and most New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc's 13.5, it's like what the drinking experience is sort of similar in a sense. It's like, it's about fruit, it's about juiciness, and what's the problem? The problem is it says Riesling, and it shouldn't be a problem, and it's changing. Thankfully, that's changing.
If it's in Sauvignon Blanc, people would be like, yeah, sure.
But yeah,
yeah. MK Shep, our favorite Aussie transplant here in Napa, doing all the great things over at Spotswood. You're down the street, ladies, so if you got a bottle of Franklin River Riesling for me to try,
were
just
here.
Say the word. I'll leave right now and go meet you for it.
I don't know what's going on with those guys. They were being imported. I think they still are, but there are differences slightly. It's over on the west coast, just near Margaret River. It's a few hours drive from Margaret River. Magnificent stuff too. Okay. I do like. I'm a big fan of. I think that when you were to pick out the top 5 Rieslings in Australia, Franklin River Riesling would be in there for sure.
I don't think that's one I've had. I don't recall the producer. So
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you've got to make that the focus of another conversation. But tasted 3 gorgeous Cabernets today. Anyone who is interested in learning more about Cabernet on the trade side, just one more time for us, Mark, where can they go to learn more, not only about Cabernet, but just Australian wine in general if they're in the trade?
Yeah, you can. We've set up a really cool education platform. It's called www.australianwinediscovered.com. And it takes you to our site, which is broken down into varieties, regions, and then topical subject matter, all of which contain PowerPoint presentations, downloadable guides. The PowerPoint presentations are editable. You can just bring it and kind of do what you want with it. So it gives you a sort of a much sort of a more deep, it's not like geeky MW study stuff, but it gives you a really nice, comprehensive look at major subject matter associated with Australian wine. And also remember the Australian Wine Connect is also a great way to get some more information. We're going to be doing some very, very cool things on that platform in terms of education, never mind the commercial end of it, trying to be able to sort of connect and buy wine. So that's kind of cool.
Great. And for those who aren't in the trade, that, like we've mentioned, the Australian Wine Connect platform is for the trade. But if you are a consumer, I think one of the best things you can do, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, in addition to going to some of the sites that you mentioned, talk to your sommeliers, talk to the people at your retail shops, chat with me on Instagram. Let people know that you're interested in Australian wine and trying more of it, because we spend money for the places that we work for if we know that the wines are going to sell. So, I mean, that's how it works. So if you let us know that you're interested in it, then we will, well, I should say we, like I have any buying power anymore, but, those who have buying power will make those choices, hopefully on your behalf. Let's maybe ask, who do we have? Fat Carp 73. Isn't that Chris Carpenter? Isn't that your Instagram? In regards to your supposition about the unique character of all Aussie wines, I'm pretty sure. having worked there now for 10 years, yeah, what sets the area apart from every other region in the world are the gum trees. All right.
That's interesting because there's definitely, I know whenever I'm in Napa and I speak to winemakers, they say, hey, yeah, here's your eucalyptus trees, take them back with you. But there's no question that's part of the environment there. And I think there is a characteristic to what we call our bushland and our forests. And I think that's a really strong point because eucalyptus it has a pervasive sort of character and it sort of is in the air and feel. I think there's probably other plants and what have you. But yeah, I think those are definitely part and parcel of it. But I mean, there's only like elements of those oils that are quite heavy that do sometimes sit on the grapes. But there's also areas where those trees don't exist as much. And even in Margaret River, for example, it's not quite the same sort of trees, but it is a strong personality in the same way that we talk about Garrigue in the south of France, in Languedoc-Roussillon, that sort of, those herbal sort of things that we seem to think transfer. I think that's probably a really strong factor. I do think we tend to try and look for gum leaf and that eucalyptus. Sometimes it exists, sometimes it kind of doesn't. We think, oh, there it is, it's got to be Australian. But without a doubt, it's a personality and characteristic of it. A little whiff of it and a little hint of it, I think, is awesome. Is that Chris Carpenter?
I'm pretty sure it is. I'm pretty sure it's Chris Carpenter. He's staying silent right now, but I'm pretty sure that's him. And Chris, the wine was gorgeous. I don't know if you caught it, but we did taste the Higginbotham. So there you go.
Good.
Mark, a pleasure as always. I'm so excited to see this full comparative global tasting in about a week or so. So thank you for taking me through these wines today. As always, you have all the information on Australian wine, and I so appreciate you sharing it, not only with me, but with everyone else out there. It is
my pleasure.
Always an informative discussion. You guys do such a great job with education. I can't thank you enough. So I'll let you go and do whatever you're doing in Des Moines, and I'm gonna take these wines and run now. Maybe I'll go down to Spotswood and
I think your friend has some Riesling for you.
I think she does. Yeah, and I've got some cabs. So although she's got tinker loads of that, but not this. So awesome. I'll see you all soon.
Awesome.
All
Thank
the
you.
links will be in my bio, and I'll post some stuff in stories as well after the fact. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks.